Good morning. How are we doing? Good. It's good to be with you all this morning. My name is Jake. If we haven't had the chance to meet, I would love to meet you after service, but it's my pleasure and honor to be able to bring some of the things that God's been speaking to me about this week to you. We started a series in the book of Ruth last week, talking about Ruth chapter 1. So today we're Ruth chapter 2. So if you bring your Bible, I won't call you old school. Somebody else might, but I think it's cool. So, if you bring a paper Bible, you can start turning to Ruth chapter 2. It'll also be on the screen for you, so no need to worry about that if you don't. But I want to quickly recap Ruth chapter 1 for us, just in case you weren't here or need the refresher. It starts out by telling us that it's during the time of the judges, which was defined by a lack of leadership. It'll say, and throughout the book of Judges, it'll say there was no king at that time. There was a lack of leadership amongst Israel, and that everyone did what they wanted to do. It will say what was right in their own eyes is the language that the Bible uses. And so there was no leadership, and everyone was kind of doing whatever they wanted. And the Bible goes from this kind of bigger story of everyone doing whatever they want to focusing in on this one family. And we're going to talk about this story of this one family now after we've kind of looked at everyone being kind of doing whatever they want. And so we see this woman, Naomi, and her husband, and they are in the midst of a famine in Bethlehem. That's where they're from. And they move out across the sea. They leave the promised land with their people, and they go to this land of Moab. And there they experience some good. They're, I guess, depending on if you see the marriage to the Moabite women as good or bad. But their sons will marry two Moabite women, and then her husband, Naomi's husband, and her two sons will then die. And so there's tragedy and grief and all this going on, which is going to lead them to come back to Bethlehem. But before they do, there's this moment where Naomi is going to tell her daughters-in-law to stay in Moab. She's going to say, stay with your families. Look, I'm a widow. I'm older. I've got to travel. Like this is kind of a death sentence for me. This is where it ends for me. So don't come with me. Stay with your families. You can still have a life. You can still move on. Like, don't come with me. And one of the daughter-in-laws, after a little bit of grief and back and forth, goes, okay, I'll stay. And then one says, no, I'm going to come with you no matter what. And her name is Ruth. She's who the book is titled after. And she has this key quote that was kind of the key passage from Ruth chapter 1, where she says to Naomi, while Naomi's trying to convince her to stay, she says, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And so together, these two women, they head back to Bethlehem, and Naomi is recognized as she gets back to Bethlehem, and they're like, hey, that's Naomi. She's like, it's been like 10 years. What's going on? She's like, look, it's not Naomi anymore, okay? That name is too positive. It means pleasant. I am not pleasant anymore. I've lost my family, my husband, my sons. Call me Mara. I am bitter. I'm bitter about what God has done to me. I'm bitter about the circumstances of my life. Don't call me pleasant anymore, please. I am bitter. I am Mara. And that's where we leave off on that happy note in chapter 1. And so that's where we will pick up now in chapter 2 as we continue in this story. It says this in the first few verses here. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech. Elimelech is the name of her husband, her deceased husband, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. Now, in this first verse, we see kind of Boaz is introduced, and I want to point out quickly, like, this is the narrator or the writer of the story letting us know who this person Boaz is. He's not indicating that Ruth and Naomi are necessarily thinking of Boaz. We'll find out later that that's kind of hidden information to them, but I think that's important to point out just because the first couple times I read this, I took that as like, they should already know who this person is, but no, this is really the narrator letting us know as the audience reading it what's going on here. And the description of Boaz, depending on what translation that you have, varies. So in our ESV that we typically preach out of, it says that he was a worthy man. If you have a New American Standard, it will say that he was a man of great wealth. If you have an NIV translation, it will say he was a man of standing. And essentially what this all points to is that he's this prominent, wealthy businessman who's got good standing in the community. He is a man of character, and he's well known. He actually is, if you're with the younger generation, maybe he's got clout. He's got aura, right? Like that's who he is. You didn't think you were going to hear that from the stage this morning, did you? But that's the kind of man that he is, and that's who we're introduced to. And so then the story goes back, the camera kind of goes back to Ruth speaking to Naomi. She says, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor." And so she says, "Go, my daughter." And I don't really fully know if this is true, but I would imagine for Ruth in this moment, there's a little bit of cabin fever going on. Like, yeah, sure, they probably need food. They've been traveling. They're coming back to a land that is really no longer theirs, and there's some discrepancies and things about that. But also, like, she is a foreigner who knows no one. The one person she does know has just told everyone to start calling her bitter. So she's living with a bitter older woman, and I just imagine that she probably wants to get out and go do something. I don't know. That's like maybe don't, but that's what she's asking, to go and gather food. It's probably more about the need for food, but that's just how I read it. And so she asked to go and gather food. And I don't know if Ruth is necessarily aware of this, but there's actually a law that God has put in place to try to provide for somebody in Ruth or Naomi's position. Back in Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 through 10, it says this: "Speaking to people who own land or farms, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. And you shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God." So all the way back in Leviticus, God is setting up this law for the Israelites to be able to provide for someone who's poor or a foreigner. Well, Ruth checks both of those boxes at this moment. And she's deciding that she's going to go out and glean. Now, she's not from Israel. She might not know this law, this custom, this history of their people. But we see that God from long ago had people like Ruth in mind, that he wanted to take care of those who were poor and foreigner or a sojourner, a traveler through the land. And we know from the last verse of chapter 1 that they showed up back in Bethlehem at the time of the barley harvest. So she is going to go out. She's going to try to find some help, some food by following some people who are already gathering grain, who are harvesting, and try to pick up what they basically miss. It's a really difficult kind of task that we're talking about here. What she has in mind is literally following people. So what kind of the harvesting practice would be, you'd have some people going in front. They'd have like big sickles in their hand, and they'd be whacking down the heads or the stalks of grain. And then you'd have other people following behind them who would gather it up in bundles. Those are called sheaves. And they would kind of tie it up. And then as you see, from a field that's being harvested, you just see like these bundle after bundle after bundle. But then you'd also see all the stubble and the leftover stalks and everything maybe that didn't have grain on them or whatever, just kind of strewn about. And so what she's trying to do is just go and find whatever little pieces of grain have fallen off the heads of those sticks and have fallen into the mud or the dirt or whatever, and there's just left over that didn't get picked up. It's like a needle in a haystack kind of mission that she's looking for, just to find enough pieces of grain that she could eventually maybe turn into a piece of bread to eat with. It's a very difficult task that she has in front of her. And so she knows what she's getting into, but there's going to be a positive kind of come out of this, that God is going to provide even more so than what just the law might indicate. And it says in verse 3, she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. Now remember, Ruth doesn't know who Boaz is yet. And so this idea, this verse, she happened to come to the place that Boaz was. She just happened, of all the field, of all the ground, of all the harvest that's happening, she just happens to come to the one that is this person she's actually related to, and she doesn't even know that yet. I don't know about you, but that begins to be a little bit too coincidental for me. I'm not sure that just happen to is the accurate description of what's happening here. In fact, I think what we see is that God is actually already starting to be at work here in providing for Ruth and Naomi in this situation. And what's kind of interesting, sorry, that's the mint I had earlier, wrapper. What's interesting about the book of Ruth is that it's one of the rare books in Scripture, especially in the Old Testament, that has no mention of God specifically up to anything. Like the characters actually mention God. Naomi will mention him. Ruth will mention him. Boaz will mention him. But there's never a point where it goes, and God did this. And I think that's significant because I think to some degree the author wants us to kind of fill in the gaps of like, yeah, God is at work here. I don't think that she just happened to be in this one land. It's not luck. It's not coincidence. This is what God is doing to provide for them. And what speaks to me about that, I think that's interesting, is because it's typically, like, I struggle with this in my own life. I'm a very analytical, logical person. I want to know what the A plus B plus C equals D kind of result is. Why did we get here, and what were the natural causes that made that happen? And if you're like me, that probably doesn't leave a whole lot of room all the time for spiritual things to come into that equation. Things that we can't describe, things that we can't determine, things that we don't have a great definition for of why this happened, or even attributing it to God in some way. It's always, well, this happened, and the pieces kind of fall into place, or logically this was the right, reasonable decision to make, or the way we view this is like, yeah, that's like, this makes the most sense, so this is what we should do. And yet, all the time, I think God is working and providing for us in ways that we kind of just see as like, yeah, that just kind of worked out. And really, it's like, no, like God wanted these things to happen. And so I ask you this, like, how likely is it that we are reading this story in the Bible thousands of years later, and it's just blind luck that Ruth happened to stumble upon the field of Boaz and not another field? I don't think it's luck. And I think that for us, a lot of times in our lives, these things aren't just luck. They don't just happen, as this story says. I think about even for my own life. So when we were coming to be a part of Mission City, I was working at a different church, and we were living in an apartment in Olathe at the time, and just had all these moments of God providing for us that could have been looked at as, fortune or luck or coincidence or whatever. I had been looking for a job for months because I knew that we were leaving the job that I had to come and be a part of Mission City. We were moving, and that wasn't going to work out anymore. It's tough to work at one church and serve highly at another. So I was looking for another job, and like all the efforts that I made just didn't add up to anything. And I kept feeling like God was telling me like a friend is going to have a job, like it's going to be provided for you. And sure enough, like the month before I was leaving that job, there was a friend of mine reached out and was like, hey, I don't know, if you would be interested in this or whatever, but I'm kind of getting a promotion, and my position is going to be available, and like you should apply. And my start date was like a week after my last job ended, and I had a week of vacation left up, and it was like just a perfect, sequence. And then we felt like we were supposed to buy a house when we moved up here, and like we'd never bought a house before, and it was scary, and like that. No, we'd just actually like someone else to cut our grass and not have to worry about that. And yet, like, we bought our house right in the fall of 2020, and I think back now, and I'm like, we couldn't afford our house if we hadn't bought our house then. And I think about, like, we had a large, like, payment, and we're thinking about trying to buy a house, and we don't have the money for it, and I need to give money to this thing that I promised I would, and I don't want to anymore because I don't have the money for it anymore. And the next day, there's a check on our doorstep that somebody had written us just to, like, hey, I heard about your situation, and we want to provide this. And it was, like, the exact amount that I had just given the night before. And I'm like, look, I could look back at that and go, these are just coincidences, man. It's fortune. It's lucky that happened. But I think it's God providing. And I think that's true for all of us. And I think it's a lesson for us to recognize that God provides for us in our lives. And oftentimes it's attributed to luck or fortune or a good reason or logic. And it's like, no, God was at work the entire time. He was doing something. It didn't just happen. And so I want to make this point before we move on here, because I think in addition to just God providing, what's really powerful to me in this story specifically is that God was providing for Ruth before she was even born. I think back to that law in Leviticus, long before anybody had even thought of the person of Ruth, that he was providing for people who were poor, who were foreigners, who were lost, who were looking for something that they needed. And then not just that, but it's true for us too. Like on our worst day, like God's already been thinking about how to provide for that. He's already had a plan in mind for how to provide for that. And we might not know what good looks like for God, like our definition, and we can argue with him about what that is or disagree about what actually good is. I'm sure Naomi had a few moments of like, really? the plan is for my husband and my 2 sons to die. And there's ultimately going to be how is there possibly going to be a good that's going to come out of this? And yet, like, God has a plan to provide from before we were even born. There's been something in place. There's been a moment in your life that God had already circled to say, this is what I'm going to do for you right now. And even if it's just as simple as looking back at the cross and going, yes, long ago, Jesus sacrificed his life for me while I was yet a sinner, as the scripture says, or not even born. Christ died for me. Like, that's the provision of God before we are even born, that he is offering himself for us. And so, God provides before we are even born. I want to continue in our story here as we're going to continue to see God's provision at work in Ruth's life and in Naomi's life and Boaz's life as well. Picking up in verse 4. It says, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. So he has finished his work in the big city. He's made his trades. He's done what he needs to do. He's coming back out to his field. And he says to his reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Anybody ever had their boss or employer greet them this way? That would be pretty cool, right? Like, just show up at work in the morning. Hey, God be with you. All right. Like, I don't know. But then Boaz says to his young man who is in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this section, but just to point out the character of Boaz and Ruth that's highlighted here. We see that Boaz, yes, we already know he's kind of a wealthy, prominent, well-respected man, but he also seems to be somewhat of a righteous man, that he includes this kind of spiritual greeting with him and his workers. He seems to be someone who cares about his people. Like, he recognizes immediately, like, of all the workers here, oh, like, that one's not mine. I don't recognize her. She's not one of the ones that I'm, so, like, it's not just, CEO at the 39th floor that has no idea what anybody else is doing. Like, he knows his workers. He knows his flock. And then you see the character of Ruth, that she is a hard worker. Like, she's already showed loyalty and humility, and she's a hard worker. She's from sun up, she's out there gathering whatever little bits of grain she can find, and she's just taking a short rest, and it's almost lunchtime at this point. So then Boaz says to Ruth in verse 8, now listen, my daughter, do not glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink that the young men have drawn. And then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? And what I love about what Boaz's response here, what he says to Ruth here, is that he's not just acknowledging her or even acknowledging the law that says, hey, yeah, I'm supposed to give you something, so would you please, take what you want and go. He's elevating her status. He's acknowledging her not just as a beggar or someone in need, but he's actually saying, look, would you be like one of my workers? Would you elevate? Would you be part of my family that's actually out here working? He says, don't go just where you want to go, but actually follow after my young women, the women that are gathering up the bundles. Work with them. Don't just follow behind and get the scraps. I want to encourage you, come and work with my people. Not just that, but I'm going to make sure I'm going to protect you. I want to provide for you. I want to protect you. None of these men are going to touch you. She's a foreigner. She's lost. She doesn't know anybody. There's not a lot of laws protecting her. Remember, everybody does what is right in their own eyes at this point. So he's providing and protecting for her. He doesn't know her. She's a foreigner. She might be even perceived as an enemy. Remember, this is somebody who is powerful, wealthy, well thought of in the community. All he has to really in this interaction is to lose. He gains nothing from offering this to Ruth. She has nothing to offer him in exchange. And yet he sees her and elevates her. I think this speaks to not only the character of Boaz, but the picture that we're supposed to start seeing of what's happening here. That when we think about a character, an individual who sees someone who can offer them nothing and bends down and picks them up and elevates them and welcomes them into a family, it's the picture of what Christ does for us here in this moment. We can't earn what God offers to us. Ruth can't earn what Boaz has to offer for her. And yet, he sees her and elevates her and says, no, I don't just want you to get the scraps. I want you to come and be a part of my family and work with them, be with them, be one of mine. And so this is the second point that I'll have for us this morning, is that God's plan to provide is through people. God's plan to provide is through people. We see God providing from long ago, before we were even born. And now also we want to see that God's plan comes through people. From the beginning, God wanted to partner with people to rule and to reign over the earth. That was our initial call from the Garden of Eden. In Genesis 2, he charges Adam and Eve with, hey, this is what I want. Have dominion over the earth. Rule over its resources. Use them well. Be like me. Be my image bearer here on earth. And so what is the plan for God? Is to provide through people. That's what he does. That's what Boaz is doing right here for Ruth. He's taking on this image-bearing role to provide for Ruth the way God has set up the plan to do. Now, I quickly want to ask, as you read this, so just real quick, God's plan to provide is through people. If you're bold enough, I'm not going to force anybody here, but if you're bold enough, if you want to raise your hand and admit, how many of you, when you read that, go, okay, so it's my responsibility as a follower of Jesus to provide for other people? Anybody? Yeah? Few? Okay, thank you for the bold of you. I'll just assume that most of you that didn't raise your hand are still in agreement with that, because I think culturally, we just assume this kind of responsibility. Like, yes, okay, God's plan is to provide through people, then I must, my usual response in church is, you're telling me what to do right now, right? From a pastor's standpoint, it's not, nodding is acceptable here. Okay, thank you. All right. Here's what I want to challenge you with. I'm not saying that this is necessarily consciously what you're thinking, but what's wrong with being Ruth? What's wrong with being the one that's provided for? Because truthfully, and we'll get to this later, I'll just kind of tease this out, when we're provided for, we have a story to go and provide for somebody else. But it's out of the provision that's been given to us. It's out of what God has given to us that we then have something to give to somebody else. See, because Ruth, honestly, could have been appreciate that. It's a nice offer of you, but I actually would like to do this on my own. I'd like to do it the hard way, pick up on my own, in my own efforts. I will earn my own bread, right? I will do it on my own. I don't need you to give me a handout. And I think oftentimes that's something that, at least I won't speak for all of you, I'll speak for myself. I struggle to not turn down the provision of others, or maybe even what God wants to provide to me through others, because I want to do it on my own. I want to prove myself. I want to earn it. And again, this is a message. This is the picture of the gospel at work, that we cannot earn this, that it would be foolish for Ruth to go, no, I don't want to work amongst your workers. I don't want to take the easy road. I don't want you to make this easier on me. I want to do it the hard way. I'm going to pick up the little pieces that are in the mud so that I can wash them off and do it myself later. That sounds foolish, doesn't it? And yet it's a picture a lot of times of how we respond to opportunities when we need someone to provide for us. And we go, no, I got this. I can do this. I'm going to provide for myself. All right, I need to pick it up a little bit. We're going to be here until the Chiefs kick off in August if I don't... Okay. So let's move on to verse 11 here. So Boaz answers her. Remember, we left off with, I am a foreigner. Why would you look at me, or why would you deal kindly with me? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And then she said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. Right there, Ruth is recognizing, I'm not one of your family. I'm not one of you. But you're treating me like one of you. And that's a beautiful picture for us. Now, quick Bible nerdy note here, if you will. I love what Boaz says here, and even the sequence that he says it. I think there's importance to it. That he is actually paraphrasing and giving Ruth's promise to Naomi back to her. So real quickly, he says, I have heard all that you have done. You left your father and mother in native land. What did Ruth say? Where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Boaz says, to a people that you did not know before. Ruth told Naomi, your people will be my people.
Boaz tells her, the God of Israel under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Ruth told Naomi, your God will be my God. He is saying, I heard the promise, the covenant that you made with Naomi, and I am here to honor that. And God bless you for that. But the interesting thing is, as he's saying, Lord repay you, God of Israel, like he's got you, whatever. Who's the one providing for her right now? He is. He is the conduit. He is the one who is actually providing. He's the one that God is using to give his provision to Ruth. So again, God's plan is to provide through people. And I don't think that the story needs to explicitly tell us that God worked through Boaz to meet Ruth's needs. We get that, right? And she recognizes she's not one of his, but he's treating her like she is. But he's not done blessing her. And it gets better. So pick it up in verse 14. And at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain. And she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she arose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. So we know that Boaz has protected her and already provided some things for her. There's been some extra provision made for Ruth, and now he's doubling down on it. He's saying, one, come sit with me. Here's a seat at my table. Have lunch with me. Eat with me. Part of my family. Also, when you're working, it's not just going to be that you're allowed to work with my workers. I want you to actually pull grain from the bundles that we have gotten together. And I'm going to have my workers kind of accidentally pull some out and leave some extra for you. Again, it's like this additional provision. And I love this part that she says, or that it points out that she ate until she was satisfied and she had some left over. Because truthfully, and our next point is that God's provision is more than satisfying. God's provision is more than satisfying. As we get the picture of how God is going to use the structure that he's made through the laws and through this individual Boaz to provide for Ruth, we see also God's provision is more than satisfying for her. As I was kind of doing some research for this sermon, I came across this quote from Charles Spurgeon, who is referred to as the Prince of Preachers, if you're not familiar with that. And you got to say some things like this to earn that kind of title. So listen to this quote. He says, she did eat and was satisfied. Your head shall be satisfied with the precious truth which Christ reveals. Your heart shall be content with Jesus as the altogether lovely object of affection. Your hope shall be satisfied, for whom have you in heaven but Christ? Your desire shall be satiated, for what can even the hunger of your desire wish for more than to know Christ and to be found in him? You shall find Jesus fill your conscience till it is at a perfect peace. He shall fill your judgment till you know the certainty of his teachings. He shall fill your memory with recollections of what he did and fill your imagination with the prospects of what he is yet to do. You shall be satisfied. I just love that he's talking about, like, in all these kind of ways of the provision of God for us. And not just physical needs, but how he provides for what he has done, what he will do, that our hearts are full, that our minds are on him, that he's given us what we seek and what we need most. So as we pick up the story again in verse 17, it says, so she gleaned in the field until evening, and she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. From sunup to sundown, Ruth is working, and she gathers about, this ephah is like 5.5 gallons of our kind of measurements. And I mean, that could make quite a bit of bread, I think. I'm not a baker myself. It feels like that would last a decent while. If you know somebody who is a baker, maybe you double check on that. But it seems like that would be, a decent amount. And she gives the leftovers of her lunch to Naomi. And I love this domino effect of God's provision. Like the idea that Boaz provides for Ruth, and then she provides for Naomi, and not just from like her physical need, as we're going to see, but she also provides through her for a spiritual longing as well. In verse 19, and her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today, and where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The man's name with whom I have worked today is Boaz." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." Oh, Naomi, you do remember that you have close relatives around and redeemers. Okay. Anybody seen the movie Dumb and Dumber before? So the scene where they're riding into town and they're like frozen together on the little moped, and they're so cold. And I want to say it's Jeff Dunn's character that's like, "My hands are frozen," and Jim Carrey's like, "Oh, well, you should try these extra gloves that I've had on." Like, you've had an extra pair of gloves this entire time? We've been riding through these frozen mountains, and you've had an extra pair? Like, your hands are sweating because you've got too many gloves on, and I'm freezing back here. That's what I think about when I read this. I'm like, Ruth's got to be like, we've been sitting here maybe homeless with no food, and you forgot that we had this rich relative down the street who's got all this land and food, and like, seriously? This whole time? And I don't know. But I wonder if, we think about Naomi and kind of the arc of her character so far. So in the beginning, we see kind of she's this mother-in-law who seems to care for her daughter-in-laws. When grief strikes and when tragedy happens, she's like, "Hey, look, you don't have a future with me anymore. Go home, be with your family." Like she doesn't maybe recognize the need that she has for the only members of her family left to be in her life, but she's trying, I think, to care for them. She seems like a good mother-in-law. She's like, "Hey, look, I want you to still have a life. Would you leave?" And then she comes back into town and she's like, I'm done with being pleasant. I'm bitter. See me as bitter." And I just wonder if that like prolonged grief that has now turned into bitterness has taken away any hope or optimism from her. Any thought of, hey, there might be a relative that might actually take us in and provide for us. She's like closed off to, I don't need to be provided for, just let me die and go on my way or something, because like I've just, like this prolonged grief in her life has turned to bitterness, and life just doesn't seem to have a lot of meaning to her anymore. And that I paint that picture because one, it's very sad that we should see her in that way. But also because this turnaround that happens in her, I think, is so important and impactful for us. Look at how she responds here. "Wait a second, where'd you gather today? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Remember, she comes into town, "I'm cursed, God's against me, calamity everywhere, don't talk to me, I'm bitter." Now, oh my goodness, look at the provision. God, would this person be blessed? Would we've been blessed? Would you, God, bless this other person? We have a redeemer. Oh, wait, yeah, you're right. We have there's hope. At least the way I read it, there's hope in her voice. She's like back to life here. And she recognizes that God would be, his kindness is not forsaken on the living or the dead. And I don't know if she's talking about physically actually living like her and Ruth are living and their husbands and sons are dead, or if she's saying Ruth, or the people that are out there that aren't grieving like I am are the living, and me personally, I've been so struck with grief and bitterness that I'm dead inside, and God has not given up on me, and that God is still provided and showing kindness to me. There's a death to life that's taking place here in Naomi. And finally, in the last section, it says, "And Ruth the Moabite said, 'Besides, he said to me, you shall keep close to my young men until they have finished all my harvest.' And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, 'It is good, my daughter, that you go out with this young woman, lest in another field you be assaulted.' So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law." I want to invite the band up as we wrap up our time here today. But I read this and I think about this kind of succession of God's provision. Whether it be, he's had the plan from long ago, he's going to use people to fulfill it, and it's going to be even more than satisfying for us. But there's a certain through line here where we see provision happen for one, and then that provision gets carried on to another, and that provision gets carried on to another. It's, for lack of a better term, and just to maybe make it, you might cringe at this, but the test that they go through when we are tested and then we see God provide becomes a testimony, right? We see a moment where there's a challenge in someone's life, where they feel like the world is kind of collapsing around them, and God steps into that moment, and he provides, and now all of a sudden, it's not just Ruth, the poor foreigner who's scrounging for food. Now it's Ruth, the woman who's been elevated to a status of family, and her needs have been met, and she can take those needs and now bring them to Naomi and tell her the story of what God has done for her. And now Naomi's brought back from death to life, and she's excited. She's found hope again. And now all of a sudden there's a spiritual awakening that's happening, and look what God has done for us. And as I read this, I'm thinking like, okay, so that's great. That's through line. And what am I missing here? Maybe it's like because there's Boaz, and where does Boaz maybe get this idea of how he can provide? And if you don't know the story, Boaz's mother is Rahab. And if you remember, Rahab is the prostitute who, the two spies that when Joshua first entered the promised land with the Israelites, she hid them. She told them, I heard about what God is doing, and we don't want to be wiped out. Would you stay here with me? And I'll protect you from the king comes and, hey, where are those two spies at? And she's like, I think they left. They're not here. And they're in her house. And she says, hey, the only thing I want from you is that when you come and you take over this city to remember my family. Remember me. And they come, they wipe out the entire city except for one family. And that's Rahab's family. Her faith led to provision. And without that, Boaz isn't here. The marriage between Boaz and Ruth doesn't happen. And I think about how I'm guessing that a couple of times around the dinner table, Boaz heard the story of the provision for her family to be saved in the midst of this happening because of the faith that she had to rescue those two spies and to keep them away. And so the dominoes just keep stacking up, where the provision of one person or God's provision through one person leads to this person being provided for and then providing for someone else. And again, we see the domino. It's just not just a physical provision, but a spiritual awakening that happens because of that. And so I want to encourage us. I know I kind of gave the challenge earlier of like God's provision comes through people of like, it's okay to be the one provided for. All right, wherever you find yourself on that, whether you are in a position to provide, praise God for that opportunity, or you find yourself in a position where I can be provided for, to recognize that it's from God and that provision provides a story that can then be shared that does far more than just meet a physical need, but that can also spark life and the Spirit of God to move in someone else. And so as we think about our lives, as we think about those in our lives, where God has provided, where we want him to provide, where we hope that someone comes along, or where we need someone to come along, would we recognize that it's not just a physical need that's being met, but that God's provision through awakens far more than that spiritually inside of us, and that he wants to use people in order to carry that out. Let me pray with me. God, we thank you for the story of Ruth and her life. I thank you for the ways that you have encouraged me through this story and that you've given these words to encourage us as a church. I pray that we would evaluate in our lives the areas where it's not just coincidence what's happening, but it's you at work. And it's not just that something fell into place, but that you provided. And that provision then sparks an opportunity for us to share that with someone else. And honestly, we have no idea how far that could go. We don't fully understand the plan of what that can do to somebody. To be shown the provision of God in the way that it could change a life. So, Father, would you just be present in our lives? Would your Spirit convict us to be humble, to receive your provision, so that we might take it and be able to provide for others as well. And to recognize that all throughout, it's you at work. God, you're so good to us. You elevate the lowly. You pick us up when we're in need. You meet the needs of those who are poor and lost. Father, we love you. It's in Jesus' name I pray.